Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of the upcoming Nullhunter at Image Comics, the writer-artist of the Silver Coin at Image Comics, as well as Universal Monsters Frankenstein at Image Skybound, and the artist of the Sacred Damned Witches, also at Image Comics. It's Michael Walsh. Thanks for coming on, Michael.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me.
I have to say, I was kind of impressed that besides everything being published by Image or a house connected to Image, that intro was a tour of basically everything you can do in a comic that isn't lettering or coloring it. So you're really doing everything. You're wearing all the hats you can right now. Are you having an identity crisis yet?
No. When I started doing Silver Coin, I had just started coloring myself. And I thought it would add a really interesting flavor to Silver Coin to letter myself by hand as well, because I really love the vibe of indie comics and zines. And I think there's a real grittiness and personality to hand lettering. So I was doing that as well. And then I was co-editing Silver Coin. And I used to doing everything and being a complete control freak over my work. And I took some time off when I had a baby. And now coming back into it, I've had to reacclimate myself a little bit and figure out how much I actually can do reasonably with the time that I have on my hands. So I'm taking a step back from some things. I've got Becca Carey is doing a lot of the lettering on my work now. I think she's got an incredible sense of design and aesthetic, and she's really good at like style suiting with artists. And then I'm co-coloring all my work with my wife, Toni Marie Griffin, who's incredible. And she started off flatting me. And then as we went, she started putting in her own color palettes. And then she started adding in texture work. So essentially the work divide now is that she flats it and then figures out the palettes to the scene with me as well. We kind of look over each other's shoulder as we figure out what kind of tone and atmosphere we want the scene to have. And then I jump in and do rendering and like light sources and stuff like that. So it's a really fun, symbiotic, dynamic process for us, and we really enjoy it.
And maybe a bit easier to figure out because you live in the same house?
Totally, yeah. We work in the same studio. We've got 2 desks in here, so she'll work in here 1 or 2 days a week with me and then do her other job the other days.
You know, you had a kid. Obviously, that is a huge difference in terms of what available time you have. You kind of talked about this a little bit, but have you had to kind of rediscover what your ceiling of capability is? Because when you were, before then, it seemed like you could kind of do everything on the Silver Coin and survive. Now there's a time crunch, it seems. Are you still trying to figure that out?
Yeah, one of the biggest differences I find is that before I had a kid, I would schedule out my month. I'm very strict on my scheduling, so I know what I'm doing every single day of the week, every day for about a month or 2 out, I'll schedule. And then I would wake up at 9 and start drawing, and then I would draw or write until I was done what I had marked down on my schedule. But now with the baby, I'm trying to work 9 to 5 because 8 hours is a long time for my partner to be with the baby in a row without having a break. But also I want to be able to spend time with him before he goes to bed at night. So I can't just work until I'm done. I need to make sure that I hit my goals in that 8-hour time allotment that I've set for myself. So it's a lot more time management than it was before. Before I would go on my phone or check my socials during the day or go out for lunch with a friend or something. But now I'm just very drilled in that 8 hours. And it took me a while to kind of get that routine going after the baby. But I finally am now, he's going to be 2 in October this year. I'm finally at a place where I'm feeling like I've got the rhythm of being a father and a comic book professional.
Have you found you've gotten faster by necessity?
I'm actually finding I'm a little bit slower now, but I'm much happier with my work.
Interesting.
So I think I take a little bit longer on the pages, but I don't have to come back to them as often. And yeah, I'm much happier with my work over the last year or so now that I'm taking a little bit longer on it than I was previously.
I do think it's funny that one of the big things that I looked at when I was considering, our conversation and everything, I didn't realize you I think I realized you had a child, but I didn't really put that in the context of your work because it seems like you have an insane amount of things going on to the point where when I actually did the Patreon post about your appearance, I didn't even include Universal Monsters Frankenstein because you hadn't mentioned it in your last email. So I spaced out your most primary project right now, the one that launches on August 28th. So you have so much going on that I forgot your main project. How are you balancing all of that? Because it seems like I mean, for a long time, you were just doing the silver coin. You also did the Oats and the Elfine, I believe, in there as well. But
Yep.
how do you balance all of that where you have a project you're writing, two projects you're writing and drawing to varying degrees, maybe not at the same time, and then you also have one that you drew it already. It's a one shot. Like, what is that balancing act like?
It's honestly completely overwhelming. And I'm happy that, Frankenstein's only 4 issues and I'm just wrapping that up. So my schedule will be a lot more manageable in the coming months. But what happened was after I took that time off, I think I took about 4 to 5 months off when the baby was first born just to help around the house and to really savor that time of having a newborn for the first time and to just really consolidate our family and and really remember those times. But when I came back to work after that, I had just booked a bunch of gigs at the same time, thinking that I would be able to work at the same pace that I was working at before, and I wasn't able to. So everything overlapped a little bit more than I had originally intended because it took me a while to get back to a pace that I was happy with. And so my current absolutely bonkers schedule, it was not how I intended it to be, but it's worked out because now I've got 3 books that I'm really incredibly proud of, all coming out in the fall and summer of this year. And I think it'll be a nice return for me because I've kind of been off of comic shelves for the last year. After Silver Coin issue 15 came out, I haven't had any interiors on comic shelves for a little while until the Creep Show stuff that I did at Skybound came out couple months ago. And that was the first thing that I did coming back to work after having the baby, was doing the issue of Creep Show that I did with Joe Hill and writing and drawing a 10 page story for the anthology book.
We're going to get into this later on, but we talked before we started recording, you've been drawing some Magic the Gathering cards.
I have been, yeah.
Are those more appealing when you're in a kind of more of a time crunch where you know that, like, I just have to do this piece for this one card rather than like 22 pages or 30 pages or something like that, where it's like a more finite project is going to be condensed and you can kind of fit it into a certain window?
You would think that, but for me, my particular set of skills is focused on storytelling. So when I have to come up with a dynamic pinup image, sometimes I have a little bit of trouble figuring out how I want the pose to look, where I want the camera to be placed, because when I'm drawing comic books, I'm so focused on making sure that the storytelling is concise and clear that a lot of my focus goes on that and not on the actual dynamic figure drawing of the character.
Right.
That's just the style of stories that I like to tell. But when I'm drawing a magic card and I'm having to, you kind of have to rewire your brain a little bit. It's almost like you're drawing a cover for a single character that doesn't have too much story. There's a little bit of story on every magic card, not always, but generally speaking. So I try and drill into that idea and find the storytelling nature of doing a pinup. So I find the magic cards always take me a little bit longer than I'm expecting them to when I do my initial sketch that gets approved by the art directors there.
You did one card called the Crawling Chorus. It totally
Yes.
rules. It's spooky as
Thank
hell.
you.
I love it. How long did that take you?
That one actually took me a few weeks because
Is that
that one
painted?
is fully painted. Yeah, fully painted with acrylic on board, and it's pretty big. So that one took a while because I haven't really painted too much with traditional paint mediums in the last 15 years, really, since I got out of college. I haven't really been doing too much painting. So I had to relearn a few of the techniques that I'd lost over the years, but I've been having a blast with those. I think I've done fully painted 3 or 4 cards in that more painterly style, and then a bunch of the cards that look like they might be colored digitally, I fully painted in that more flat comic book style.
You're completely destroying my magic cards are much more time efficient theory that I had going into this. It's dead, Michael. It's dead.
It really depends on the card, and also if I'm doing the card in a more comic book style with heavy inks and blacks and like large areas of black negative space, those ones can be a little bit faster. But the fully painted cards take me a while for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put a pin in magic for a little bit. We'll come back to that. But Let's talk about some of your projects because you have many. We'll start with Universal Monsters Frankenstein, your upcoming Image Skybound series with colorist the aforementioned Tony Murray Griffin that launches on August 28th. Here's the solicit. The series is an electrifying new vision of the horror classic. Each issue of the limited series tells the shocking story behind one of the body parts used to create the unforgettable monster in the original film. In this first issue, Dr. Henry Frankenstein begins his unholy quest to create life by robbing the grave of a decorated police officer. But little does he know that the corpse has a son who is mourning a father, and that this young boy will forever change Frankenstein's life. I have to say, I didn't really know what to expect, but I absolutely love this first issue. One of the things I think that is really amazing about it is it's obviously a Frankenstein story, and it's obviously a Frankenstein's monster story, but it felt extremely you at the same time. It kind of, I'm not going to say it felt like the silver coin, but it did not feel like the silver coin in its own way. There's definitely cursed people in this story, that's for sure. But let's get the basics out of the way to start. How did this project come together, and what was its appeal for you?
I had just come off of Creepshow.
Skybound connection.
Yeah, and me and Alex Antone, who's the editor on Creepshow, and Frankenstein, who's at Skybound, we've been talking for years about working together. He used to be at DC, and I was at Marvel at the time working on, I don't know what it was, maybe Star Wars or something, but we had met at a show, and he was a fan of my work, and I was a fan of the comics that he edited. And we had talked for a couple years and just nothing ever really lined up. Our timings were always off. We were out of sync. And then when I was just gearing up to get back into work after going on paternity leave, he had asked if I'd be interested in writing and drawing a Creepshow story because he was a big fan of Silver Coin. And he said, it's obviously a perfect fit. It's a horror anthology, and you write every 5 issues of Silver Coin. And he just thought I would be a really good voice to have on that book. So we did that, and then he had sent me the schedule, and it said Joe Hill on the schedule, and I said, "Oh my gosh, is Joe Hill writing a Creepshow story?" I said, "If he's writing a 10-page story, I'd love to be thrown in the hat for that." And he said, "Well, actually, he's doing a 40-page one-shot of Creepshow, and the artist just had to cancel. So if you're interested, I'll talk to him." And we did that together. So getting to work with Joe Hill and Jason Chiaramella was really cool. And working with Alex again was great. And then so me and Alex have, built up a rapport, a working flow over time now. And he had some Universal Monsters available, and he asked if that's something that I would be interested in doing. And Frankenstein's always been one of my favorite novels, the original Frankenstein novel by Mary Shelley, and I've always had in my head some ideas for an adaptation of that. This isn't exactly Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and it's not its own thing either. It's a companion piece to the 1931 Frankenstein film. So the prompt from Skybound and Universal was that everything that happens in that 1931 movie is in the continuity of the comic, and they had said to me, you can either do an adaptation of the film, you could do a sequel without treading on Bride of Frankenstein toes, or you could do a prequel, but we want to make sure that we have the iconography of that version of Frankenstein's monster at front and center in the comic. So my idea was to, like you said, it was to tell some of the stories that's happening in between the scenes of the original film, find out where the body parts came from, and how this experiment has affected other people outside of the main characters in that Frankenstein film. So we're following Elizabeth, Frankenstein's fiance, a lot more. We're following a brand new character that I created for the comic, Paul, who is a young man whose father's body parts were used in the creation of the monster. And we're following Fritz, and we're following a little bit of the good doctor himself. So we're kind of jumping around between focal points through the issues, and it's not really an anthology story, and they're not necessarily one shots. Everything ties in together, but each issue has a beginning and ending and feels like its own story.
I have to say, like I said, I didn't really know what to expect from this. And I've never read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And
it's fantastic. You must.
At some point, I absolutely will. But I also have never really had like a significant affinity for Frankenstein, despite the fact that I find the character to be, Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster are tragic characters in many ways. But the thing that really got me was the first 2 pages where Paul, which actually I realized I didn't even realize his name, where he's talking to his dad and he's talking about the toy that he made him and how it's broken. And I was so mad at you reading that comic because you were making me feel emotions I didn't want to feel, Michael. And it was really
Mhm.
rude. And I just want you to know that. You're rude.
Well, I'm very happy to hear because that's all I ever want to do in my books is make people feel emotions. That's like the main goal. So
Yeah.
thank you for saying so.
But I mean, I think that's the thing that's interesting about it is there's been a lot of Frankenstein in the world. With all these
Hmm.
universal monsters, there's been a lot of these monsters, and there's been a lot of different versions, and there's been a lot of ways in. And the body part angle and kind of focusing it on an individual and kind of where these body parts came from and all these different things, focusing on the characters that didn't exist or didn't get as much shine in previous stories,
Hmm.
I think it completely unlocks the story for me and actually makes me want to go and read the original story and watch the 1931 movie in a way that I've never really wanted to. And I don't know. Good job by you. That's a really
Thank you.
fantastic mechanic you unlock there.
It's going to be very interesting for fans of the original film because I worked very, very hard to line up shots from the movie and then intersperse my own characters in those or reactions from characters that you don't see in that movie. Like the iconic scene from the original film where Frankenstein lifts the monster up through his laboratory into the air and it gets presumably hit by lightning. You don't actually see the lightning. You don't really see what happens to the monster on the roof. So there's all these opportunities in that original film to do my own thing within the framework and use the visual language that they've set up in that movie. And then I'm even paying I do a lot of like shots that are similar to the ones in the movie, but then everything in between those shots is new. So I feel like it adds a lot of context and hopefully some depth. And I'm really looking forward to people who are going to watch the movie and read the comic and kind of get a bit of the of what I'm doing there.
How do you balance out all of the pre-existing stories and trying to tell your own thing? Because obviously you're trying to incorporate in some ways. You want to have those images and those visuals in there so people who are fans can see it. But is it important for you to not let it get too far into your head as you're trying to do your own thing?
It's a really tough balancing act too, because it's easy to get bogged down by trying to stay faithful to the source material. It was really tough on Last Jedi to just do something different because there's so much to cover in that movie, and in the 6 issue adaptation and the comic that I did of Last Jedi with Witta is just it was so tough to try and do something different and unique. But I was given a ton of freedom by Skybound and Universal to really tell my own story here and to play with themes that I think aren't really delved into too deeply in the film. And I really wanted to make sure that the reader was getting the picture that in my mind I see Frankenstein as the true monster of the story and that his ambition absolutely twists him into this monster of a person that doesn't think about all the effects on the people around him that what he's doing are causing. And he thinks it's for a good cause, obviously, but I just wanted to tell a story that had more breadth to it than the original film. And I did take in some stuff from the Mary Shelley novel as well, and some of the ideas that she had for some of the characters and some of the backstory that'll come into play in the other issues. But yeah, it is a balancing act because you want to play to the fans of the original film, but you also want this to be an enjoyable project for new readers or also an enjoyable project to readers of the novel who either don't care for the film or haven't seen it. So I'm trying to appease 3 audiences. And at the end of the day, I just decided to tell a good story that I would enjoy reading and hope that my tastes align with the people who love Frankenstein because I'm a lover of Frankenstein. So I think it's just like such a interesting story to tell, and there's so many different directions that you can take it. All I could do is just use my own voice and play to my own strengths.
I mean, ultimately, you're the person that has to be satisfied with it the most. And like,
Yes.
not to overly simplify it, but it's like if you did something that you were trying to speak to those 3 audiences and you were sacrificing your own affinity for your own story, I feel like we could feel it in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's interesting, and I think in one of the issues even I almost played to the movie too much. And Alex, being a good editor, said to me, I think we could maybe get a little deeper into this specific character and take out some of this stuff because, I know it happened in the movie, but maybe we don't need to see that. Maybe we should just focus in on one of the things that you're obviously tapping into with one of the characters. So that to me, that's what a good editor does is they find a way to make your story better without stepping on your toes, which is like kind of an incredible working relationship to have.
I have no idea how these Universal Monsters books work. Do they involve like licensors or anything like that, or is it just strictly you dealing with?
No, they have so Universal. I'll everything goes through Alex and then to Universal, and then Universal will get back to me on the script and on art and stuff like that. But they've honestly been great. They've been really great with me in terms of I've worked with a lot of different licensors over the years, and I must say that Universal's probably the best. All their notes have been really strong, and they really are enjoying the book, and they totally get what I'm going for, and I can tell that they just have a love for the source material as well. So it's been a really incredible experience, frankly.
I mean, some of the stories I've heard, that is not always the case with those types of things.
It's not, sadly, and I'm not gonna trash any of my past experiences, but I will just say that this has been a exceptionally good one.
Yeah. A couple of creative things. Now, this might just be foggy memory of the silver coin, or maybe me oversimplifying some of it. But one of the things that stood out about this and the Sacred Damned is, are you using more double page spreads than you used to? Maybe it's just because I'm reading it digitally, but it feels like there's some really killer double page spreads in both of these. And it's not like you're using them so much, but you mentioned the scene of seeing Frankenstein's monster get hit by lightning. And that scene is a double page spread. I guess, apologies, retroactive spoiler alerts for something I said 15 seconds ago. Is that something you're doing, or have I developed amnesia about a comic I very much love?
No, you're completely right, actually. I personally am not a huge fan of double page spreads. I find that you have to be very, very conscious of the reason that you're using them because they don't read well digitally. I read a lot of comics on my iPad, and whenever I come to a double page spread, it usually will take me out of the experience, right? And I think that if the future of comics goes into a more digital focused medium, they're just not going to read as well. I also think that they're overused a little bit, and I don't think that they should be used for dialogue dumps. I think that a lot of the times double page spreads work best when they're a huge splashy image that you can just take in all at once instead of having to read through the 2 pages and losing yourself in the gutter. You kind of want to open it and just be floored by it. In my opinion, as a storyteller, that's how I like to use them. And so generally I err on the side of not using a double page spread. But with Universal, or with Universal Monsters Frankenstein, James Tynion had set up a bit of a visual language in his Dracula book where all of the title cards were on a double page spread.
Mm-hmm.
And then Rom picked that up, Rom and Dan on Creature from the Black Lagoon, and then they did the same thing where they had their title card on the double page spread. And Alex said, James did this and Rom did this. So there's a bit of a visual language that we've tapped into for the Universal books. You don't have to do it, but if you have a way that you can make it work, like just keep it in your mind a little bit. And I thought, well, if I can make it work, then I'll be more open to using them in this books because it'll be just a part of the style of storytelling that I'm using in it. And I kind of found my in for how I'm going to use them because each issue has a subtitle. So the first issue is called The Hands of a Father. And now each issue is going to have a big opening sequence where we see where this body part came from. And then you get the big splashy DPS. So I found my way to make it work for me and to have a special meaning to it. And then there will be other moments, but not many where they're in there because, like I said, I really, really save them for special moments and for big splashy moments. But yeah, and then on Sacred Damned, working with Saber was great, and Pornsack and Will. And yeah, Saber just had some in the script, and he said, if you're comfortable with this, if you think you can make it work, let me know. Let me know how you like to draw double page spreads, if you even like to draw them. And the way he had scripted it, I thought was perfect. So, like I said, it's not an info dump. It's not just a ton of talking heads or anything like that. It's this kind of turn the page, gasping wow moment, which is what I think the page spreads should be.
It's cool as hell. That's a really good one. Yeah, it is funny though, because part of the reason why, beyond my foggy memory of the silver coin and it's like, and like the very specific ways you do it, I think of you as somebody who thinks about storytelling above all, and not to make double page spreads seem bad, because obviously, who doesn't love a
They're
good
not.
yeah, who doesn't love a good
Yeah.
double page spread when used right?
Yes.
I think that's part of the reason why I kind of didn't think that that was one of your normal things, is like you just kind of focus on like the storytelling and all that, and like double page spreads, like doing a big splash isn't normally your thing, and they really worked in both of those books. One other thing I want to note: the
Mhm.
colors in there are great. You and Tony Marie do a fantastic job.
Thank you.
However, there are some panels that really kill, and they're the ones that have either pure white backgrounds, or there
Mhm.
is one at the end that is almost entirely black. Actually, there's one that is entirely black, but the one that precedes it is almost entirely black. And those two ones, those two like sides, are so amazing. And the way you deploy those in this issue, great stuff. Love it.
Thank you. Yeah, we did a lot of talking about how we wanted to do the colors on Frankenstein because I did want to pay homage to the original film and the way that those black and white movies looked. They had this grain to them and a distortion to the way it displays on the screen, and I wanted to capture a bit of that in the colors. So there's a film grain texture over top of all of the colors, which gives them this a bit of a washed out effect.
Yeah, I mean, I just love the way you guys handle the colors, and then like the kind of negative space with the white background and everything. I think that worked really well. But let's talk about your other project that's coming up. I think, is the Sacred Dam coming in October?
Yes,
Yeah.
the Sacred. I'm not sure the exact date. I'm spacing right now, but I know, yeah, Sacred Damned and Nullhunter are both coming in October.
Okay, so The Sacred Damned is a one shot you're drawing with Saber Pirzada writing, and it's part of the Horizon Experiment, which is a unique series of one shots that act as basically proof of concepts for the potential of a series that could become something more if they do well enough. And it's this really unique thing that Pornsak Pishashot and an array of others are putting together. Actually, Pornsak himself, he described The Sacred Damned as being about a Muslim John Constantine. That is very accurate. I know I already hyped up Frankenstein, but this comic was great. It was fantastic. And the funny thing is Pornsak had already actually shared the ash can with me. And so I just read like the one section that's in there about this character, a cursed character whose situation I don't want to describe, but it's definitely worth reading. He runs into the wrong type of demon. Let's put it like that, a jinn.
Hmm.
Anyways, and so I was like, oh, I kind of know what to expect. And then I got into it, and I was like, this story is even more wild and incredible than I expected. So great comic, but I am curious as to what made you want to be a part of this kind of mad science project they were cooking up with the Horizon Experiment, because it's unique. It's very different.
Hmm. Hornsack approached me because we are buddies now. He wrote a issue of Silver Coin, and so we already had a really good working relationship, and we got on really, really well working on that together. And I'm a huge fan of everything Pornsak does. I think he's one of the best writers making comics right now. He's an incredible storyteller. He's got such a great perspective, and he's whip smart, and I think he has some great ideas. So he approached me and said, I've got this thing I'm doing. Saber Pirzada hasn't really worked too much in comics, but he's a very, very accomplished writer. He's worked on these TV shows and this and this, and here's a graphic novel that he's done, and he's going to be doing Miss Marvel. And he gave me a bit of a rundown on what the book was going to be. And, it just sounded so interesting to me. It sounded like a really fun horror story that was very different from other horror stuff that I'd done before. I really liked what I'd read of Saber's work after Pornsak showed it to me, and I really wanted to work more with Pornsak because I knew that he would be editing the book really closely, so I'd be getting to work with him again. And when I read the treatment for the book, it just sounded like right up my alley. I love folklore. I love religious themes in horror. I love getting to draw my own take on classical folklore creatures or monsters or demons, what have you. And I thought that this was a really interesting protagonist too. Anaya, she's a Muslim John Constantine. Like she's just a badass, really smart, really strong. She's funny. She's a great character, and I was really excited to put my stamp on a new character like that I think could be the type of character that people latch onto, and really enjoy her exploits and what she's going to be doing in the future. And some of the scenes were so grisly when I first read the script, and I thought, wow, I really want to figure out how I'm going to draw this and make it as scary as it sounds on the script. It just sounded like the perfect project for me, and at the time, and not having a huge commitment right off the hop was a nice idea to just do the one shot with this team and to jump in on this project from the ground up because I think it's going to be something really special. And when you're invited to a great party, why not attend, right?
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Convention season is upon us, but don't forget to support your favorite creators on Zoop. There's still time to get the Breed Omnibus from the legendary Jim Starlin, as well as Sway's gorgeous art book Swayonce. Zoop also have launches from huge names like Christian Ward, Sanford Green, Bill Morrison, Franco, and Babylon 5's Claudia Christian coming this month. And don't forget to check out the e-commerce store on Zoop where you can buy books from successfully funded campaigns like Axe Wheeler John by Nick Patera or the Eisner-nominated Comics for Ukraine anthology. For creators looking to crowdfund your project or have your books for sale in Zoop's brand new e-commerce marketplace, fill out the form on their Submit Your Project link on their website. And now, back to the show. I do think it's funny that Ashcan had me thinking one thing when it comes to a certain character in it, and then when I read the whole story, I realized that my take from that one snippet was not necessarily totally accurate, and that is kind of like the beauty of what you two do on this book. It's just it's quite the journey. The main character that's not Anaya, the Muslim John Constantine, has a roller coaster ride throughout this story. Let's put it like that to dramatically oversimplify what is a very tumultuous experience for a cursed man.
Yeah, it's pretty gruesome, and I really liked the hook at the end of the issue too, because it made it feel like Anaya was very different than other heroes. I know I'm doing air quotes around heroes that we've seen in these kinds of comics before. I think it's not your typical horror action comic. So I can't wait for people to read it. I think people are really going to enjoy that for fans of Constantine and Swamp Thing and Hellboy, even those kinds of stories.
There's a lot of reversals in this story that are really interesting, where you kind of feel like you know what's happening, and you're like, wait, what is happening right now? And then you're like, oh, okay. It very much keeps you on your toes. I feel like I know what really gruesome part you're talking about, though. There's a scene that involves a bed. I'm gonna put it like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that was, I read that and I was just like, oh, this is dark. Oh boy, this is very dark.
That's one of those pages that as you're drawing it, you give yourself a little bit of the shivers. And whenever that happens, I know I'm doing a good job.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot to give me the heebie-jeebies now. I've drawn so many issues of Silver Coin, and some of those issues get pretty gruesome as well. So I have a high threshold for terror and body horror, and I got there on Sacred Damned.
Yeah, good job by Saber. I mean, taking you to the place you don't normally get anymore.
Yeah.
I did mention this earlier, but it is interesting how both this and Frankenstein kind of did remind me of the Silver Coin, and not just because you drew them. With both, one you're writing and drawing, the other you're working with somebody who was newer to comics at that point, so maybe you were able to take a little bit more control as far as the visuals are concerned. Do you find that mentally and creatively you approach each story you draw in a similar way, or do you try to mix things up from a project to project basis?
I definitely try and mix things up, but I think that there's a bit of an inevitability in the instinctual way that I work, and that some of my storytelling techniques are just going to be prevalent in everything I do. And I think because I was doing Silver Coin and horror for so long, that I have a way that works for me to tell those kind of stories. I do think that all of those are quite, those two books are quite different in the kind of horror that it's showing. Sacred Damned is much gorier and there's a lot of blood on some of those pages, whereas Frankenstein, that is completely scaled back, and I think that the terror is more psychological in the way that it's seen.
Right.
And there are some body horror elements to it, but we wanted to make a Frankenstein story that could go on a shelf at the Universal theme park and would be, a kid could open it and not be absolutely disgusted by some kind of centerfold image like some of the things that happen in Sacred Dam. So the type of horror that is happening in each issue of those two books is very different, but I can't help but just do things my way, I guess. I've been doing it for so long now that I just have a way of drawing comics, and I think that that's probably what fans of mine enjoy about the books that I do. But and honestly, with Sacred Damned, I know we said that Saber was relatively new to working in comics, but that script was so tight. It was so well written and so drawable right off the hop. I find that a lot of the TV writers that I've worked with before have some issues with how many beats they can fit on a page in the translation from scripts to art. But Saber had such a great grasp of how much real estate there was on each page of a comic that I really like, it was one of the easier scripts to draw that I've worked on in a long time, just because he was a very thoughtful writer, and you could tell that he put a lot of time into working out just exactly how to pace this issue.
That makes sense. And that's great. I mean, I've heard nothing but great things. And to be honest, it's such a good comic. I kind of am just like, I can't wait to see more from him. But I want to go back to something that, if I remember correctly, you talked about on the podcast 2 times ago. Like, I might have been your first visit on the show. And I think it was right around when the Silver Coin was launching. And we were talking, and you said that you really wanted horror comics to become a bigger thing, and you wanted to push for yourself to become part of that. And I think it's funny because when I was talking to Pornsack about this project, he said that when he and Saber were talking about who to get to draw this book, that they knew you were the right answer because you're the horror artist in their mind. And I think it's kind of funny that in, like, I don't know, let's say like the period of like 3 or 4 years, horror comics have went from being something you wanted there to be more of to there is plenty for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And you've kind of become like a go-to horror artist. In some ways, I kind of feel like the thing you wanted from comics and for yourself has ended up happening, just maybe not in the way you expected.
It totally has. I mean, I wanted to get into horror stuff for a long time just because I'm a fan of that genre. As someone who consumes films and novels and other comics, I think manga does horror better than anybody. And I read a ton of Junji Ito or PTSD Radio, or like we were saying before, even 20th Century Boys dips into the world of horror a little bit. But I just find it really gratifying to draw horror. I don't know what it is. I think the idea that I'm going to draw something that's going to not necessarily upset someone, but disturb them, that's going to get this kind of visceral reaction from a person, it brings joy to me. And I think that it's not just disturbing emotions, but anything that is going to have an effect on somebody, that's why we do this. That's why we draw books to entertain. We do it for ourselves, of course, as well, but that idea that these stories that I'm telling are going to affect people in really intense emotional ways is it's a really special feeling. You're touching people in all kinds of different ways, and in the horror way, you're scaring the pants off them, but you're entertaining them too.
Yeah. I mean, I did say earlier that I thought you were rude and that I was mad at you, and you said you were happy about that. So clearly this is something you like.
That's true. Yes, that's true. But I am getting a point though now where I do need to branch out, I think, and do a little bit of other stuff at some point soon. I mean, Silver Coin will come back next year, and I've got a book. I'm going to be working on something for about a year to a year and a half with one of my favorite people in comics, but that won't be getting announced till next year. And that has some horror elements, but I would say it's not a horror book.
So there's 2 things I want to say about that. One, I think we talked about this when we talked about that forever ago. And one thing is, I do think horror is uniquely suited to comics because the pacing works so well, and like the page turn works so well for that. I also think comedic things work really well, but nobody uses that quite as well. I mean, I think Kyle Starks does it really well, but the list of people who do funny comics really well is not as long as the one who do horror comics quite as well. But The flip side, I was going to say, I do think it's really funny, and it seemed very deliberate that Nullhunter, which is your upcoming Image series with Gustavo Vargas and Becca Carey, is not a horror comic. It's a sci-fi one. And that kind of
Mhm.
felt like, to me, it felt like you being like, I gotta do something that's not horror, or I'm gonna drive myself crazy. Were you looking for some personal counter programming?
Maybe subconsciously. I think that for me, Null Hunter was an idea that I've had for a long time. I grew up obsessed with Greek mythology. I was such a nerdy kid and I loved comics and video games and movies and Magic the Gathering. But I also really loved Greco-Roman mythology. And I had a bunch of these textbooks just that would go through the labors of Hercules and Perseus's trials and Jason and the Argonauts and all these classic stories. And I always thought they were so fun and so big and larger than life, and they felt so timeless even for me as a kid. But I've always really thought they were just such interesting stories, and they're all really, really dark when you get down to the root of it. And I wanted to find an inroad to do a play on Greek mythology for a long time. And originally, Silver Coin was set to be only a mini series. It was going to be 5 issues, and then I was planning to do another creator owned after that I was going to write and draw myself. And I had started thinking on doing this story that would be the 12 Labors of Hercules, and each issue would be one story, one labor, and I would retell those labors with a very hard sci-fi cyberpunk vibe to them. And that was something that I was thinking about doing after Silver Coin. But when the first few issues of Silver Coin did really well, I wanted to keep that book going. So I started thinking about developing Null Hunter as a project that I'd have somebody else draw. And as I was hunting for artists, I came across Gustavo's work, and he was already doing a bunch of cyberpunk stuff. He had been kickstarting his own Peruvian cyberpunk stories, and he was just starting to get a foothold in some of the bigger companies. He did a Marvel Voices issue, so he was like pretty fresh, but so hungry, and he works so hard, and he has such incredible character design. So I thought this guy is perfect for this story because his characters, his action, his storytelling, it's all so interesting and it's so perfect for the story that I wanted to tell. So what we're doing is Olympus, instead of being this great mountain that houses all the gods, is a tech corporation, and Zeus is essentially Elon Musk, the chairman and CEO of this tech corporation. And the corp became so powerful after terraforming a bunch of other planets that it took over government, it took over military, and became the main power of the known galaxy in this world. And so there was a corporate war where all the corporations were vying for power, and Olympus won that war. And the Hercules character is a war veteran who has a tragic event happen to him after the war and is recruited back into Olympus to help them hunt down stolen assets in null space, which is ungoverned by Olympus because it's so far out of their reach of where they've colonized. It sounds complex, but all of that is background dressing for 12 issues of pure action
John
and
Wick in space.
cyberpunk sci-fi fun. Yeah, I think if you're going to think about the tone of the book, it's John Wick in space. It feels a little bit like Declan and Warren Ellis's Moon Knight, where you're getting these one-shot action-packed hard sci-fi stories that have a bit of the Greek tragedy to them, and fun plays on those old stories. So, for example, the Hydra, which is the second issue, has Hercules going into this den of a gang where the leader of the gang is able to move his consciousness between members of the gang through their Neuralink. And so every time Hercules goes through one of the members of the gang, the leader will just transfer his consciousness into the other members and they'll storm into the room. So it's these weirdly modern sci-fi takes on classic Greek monsters.
You seem really into this, and I mean that in the most complimentary way.
I am. I like I said, I'm a huge nerd for Greek mythology, and I thought it was just a fun problem to present myself, honestly, because what making comics, what telling stories is a lot of times problem solving. And for me, I think I work best when there is a box and I have to find my way out of it. So by presenting myself with these Greek uh, stories of mythology and monsters and gods, and then trying to find a way to make this interesting and new in the world of sci-fi is just such a fun challenge for me. And I think it brought out some really interesting things from me and from Gustavo, who's the artist and who's doing some incredible work, the best work of his career so far.
I do want to compliment you. That is actually the first time I've ever said to somebody on the podcast, you seem really into this, which is, you would think that it's just implied because you're making it, but you seem like exceptionally so. As you were talking about the Hydra and how you've come up, you're a variant, I was just like, this is great. Michael's so jazzed about this. This is awesome.
It's one of those books where a big part of the fun is just building out the world in ways that aren't even on the page, or they're just in the background, you know?
Oh, I'm sure you know so much about this book that we'll never even see.
100%. It's wild, actually. I'm hoping to put in a bunch of back matter in the book just to build out that world so I can at least put some of this information on the page for people that are interested.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. This book has like a tragedy at the heart of it. It has the 12 labors, very much so. It has this cyberpunk, like, I have very limited cyberpunk experience, so basically everything for me relates to playing Shadowrun on the NES when I was a kid. And so, like,
Right.
seeing something like Nullhunter, I'm like, that reminds me of Shadowrun. It's like that meme that where people talk about it. It's like, I'm getting a real Shadowrun type vibe from this, says the person who's only played Shadowrun.
Right, right.
But the funny thing is it's also kind of got this action movie angle to it where I could almost see, if it weren't for the fact that an extreme tragedy is driving the main character, saying something like, just when they dragged me out, or just when I got out, they dragged me back in. Like, it's just like totally the vibe to it. And it really works. I guess the one big question I had, and I understand why, like fundamentally, is that why you aren't drawing this yourself. Obviously, you only have one of you, and there's only so much time. Was there ever a version of this that would have been drawn by yourself, or did you always see somebody else drawing it?
At first, I thought I would be the one to draw it. But like I said, Silver Coin went off and I wanted to do more of it because I was having so much fun getting to work with all these different writers and to put that world together. And then the more and more that I thought about Nullhunter, the more fun I thought it would be to bring in somebody different that would have different voice and experience than mine and would bring a different kind of design to the world and bring another voice, because I do think, like, I love doing everything myself, like I said, but part of the joy of comics is collaboration. And when I saw Gustavo's cyberpunk books, I just knew right away, like, this guy is going to be perfect for Nullhunter, and I hope that he has the time and interest to do it. So I'm really jazzed to have him on board and to get him as the co-creator of the book. I think that, you know, a lot of it has even changed since he came on board, just because he was doing such interesting things in some areas that I wanted to really play to those strengths. And his action is so good. I really love the way he panels out action on the page. But yeah, and like you were saying, it's like it's become almost more pulpy as I'm writing it. Like, the dialogue, it feels like almost like a 90s action movie, you know? Like, it's got a bit of that vibe to it, and I'm having a blast writing these characters like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a scene in the first issue where he gets wrecked. The main character gets absolutely wrecked by somebody. And I kind of feel like I could see him just be like, I'm just going to rub some dirt on it. Or like, I'm going to walk it off or something like that. I'm like, don't walk it off. You're grievously injured, my guy. Come on.
Yeah. It's the kind of book that would just be, if it was a movie or a TV show, it would be just a blast to sit down in a theater and watch it with a bucket of popcorn, you know? That's kind of the comic I wanted to make with this one.
I like Gustavo's colors on it. I feel like it fits it really well. Like, I mean, not to say that you and Tony wouldn't do a great job with it, but at the same time, there's something about his palette and his approach to it that feels really unique and makes it really pop in a really great way.
Oh yeah, it's got that neon soaked kinetic energy to it that is going to be, I think, familiar for fans of the genre, but also very different from a lot of the stuff that's on comic shelves right now. It's definitely got a very unique flavor to it.
It's got a real Shadowrun vibe to it.
Real Shadowrun, real Neuromancer, real.
Yeah.
I feel like people who aren't super familiar with Cyberpunk, they've got 3 or 4 points of reference. They're Cyberpunk 2077, they're Neuromancer, they're The Matrix, and they're Shadowrun. Those are the 4 Cyberpunk things that people know of that genre. But I do think those are touchstones of the genre, so they're good ones to read or to watch. or to play, I guess.
Much to my chagrin, I can feel his violence when I read it, and I'm just like, oh, this really it's hurting to read this book. This is tough times for my guy.
Yeah, he has a hard go of it. I mean, those Greek stories, they're tragedies for a reason, you know. They're
I mean, they're labors. They're not called like easy days. It's not the 12 easy
no,
days of Hercules.
no, he has a tough time. But it's a fun long arc, and I'm pacing it in a similar way to the way that a lot of Monster of the Week animes work, where it's like the first episode and the last episode and the episode in the middle of the season are the big mythology episodes, and every other one is a Monster of the Week. So I think the structure of the story is really interesting, and I'm hoping people pick up on that.
Did you have a notebook where you just wrote down Greek words and then try to come up with sci-fi equivalents?
No, I'm doing a lot of those in while scripting because I'm trying to give a lot of stuff different names or come up with sci-fi equivalents, and it's a fun little brain exercise while I'm writing to be doing that.
What was the name of his ship again?
It's well, it's Pegasus, right?
It's Pegasus, right? Yeah, yeah.
There's letters in there and there's a dash in there somewhere
Of course it is.
because a lot of the things are like there's designations to the planets, so they're like as a designation 3A, but if it's L3R dash 3A, it looks like it could be Lernia, right? Where one of the countries is in the labors. So I'm having a lot of silly fun doing that.
I really wish you had a notebook. I felt like you're going to have a notebook just filled with like random Greek sci-fi equivalents. But all right, just a couple more questions. I did want to ask about, I think the silver coin's interesting because it seems like something you really love. It really seems like a project that really spoke to you. And like you have all these different projects, you have all these things you need to do. You also have a life and you have a family and you have to do all these things to provide you and your wife. How difficult is it to balance life needs versus creative wants? Because I imagine that if it was just like, if you were just all of a sudden you became the lottery winner, you would probably just do the silver coin maybe. How difficult is to balance those sides?
It's tough, and I'm still figuring it out. I'm a pretty new dad still, so I'm still, there's a lot of balancing between how much money I'm bringing in, supporting the family, what books are going to gratify me on a creative level, what books I'm even being offered at the time, how much time I'm spending on them, how much time I have. There's so many different factors in the equation that it's really tough. I've got a couple weeks off at the end of this month because I'm going to be finished on Frankenstein and I need to recharge a little bit. And then after that, I might have a better answer for you because I'm going to rethink my schedule for the fall, winter, and for next year because my big problem right now is that I have way too many ideas and pitches and books that I want to do, and I don't even have relatively close to enough time. I've got, besides Nullhunter and Frankenstein and
Silver coin.
Sacred Damned and Silver Coin and the other project that I can't really talk about, I've got about 3 or 4 other books that I want to write right now, and I just do not have the time in the day to do it. So I think I might be taking just a little bit of a step back from art for a little bit, or just only drawing one single book at a time, just so I can get a few more of my books out that I'm writing. Just so I can just get it off my chest, and then I can go back to focusing primarily on art, I think.
I feel like that's a common story of late with artists where not that they're dialing back the art completely, but you have a finite number of hours in the day and in your life, and
Yeah.
you have a lot more ideas than you have capacity for. So you have to write, and that's just kind of how it works. And that's great because there's a lot of artists out there. But it is really interesting to see like the balance with all that. I mean, I guess that brings up one of the interesting questions is like the Sacred Damned by nature is designed to be a book that if it pops, it becomes a bigger story. And
Mhm.
like, I mean, I guess that's a question for future Michael to answer is like, what happens if that happens? Because you don't know if it'll happen. But
Yeah.
that is kind of like a looming thing as well. Not to put any stress on your life, but I'm sure you've thought of it already.
Oh yeah. Well, we've done a lot of talking about the future of that book and the circumstances that would turn it into an ongoing or a mini, and yeah, all that stuff is all theoretical at the moment. So that's a bridge that we'll have to cross when we come to it right now, I think.
Absolutely. I do want to talk about Magic the Gathering again. I'm not a Magic guy. You were a Magic guy. Maybe even
Yes.
are a Magic guy. I have to ask, there have been a fair few comic artists doing magic cards. Like I think Yuko Shimizu even did some magic cards, which was really amazing.
Mhm.
What is the story behind that? Is there like a comic obsessed benefactor over there that just wants to bring folks in? Like how did this project come together for you?
Well, I've been a huge Magic the Gathering guy since the 90s. I grew up playing as a kid. I started playing all the way back in probably 96. Played for 5 or 6 years and then kind of fell out of it a bit. I started playing again in college or right when I graduated college. And then I stopped after a couple of years and then yeah, I got booked to draw some Magic cards, and it reinvigorated my love of the game. So now I play almost every week with a bunch of buddies down here, and I love it. But how this came about was an art director reached out to me from Magic the Gathering, asking if I'd be interested in drawing werewolves in my comic book style for Magic the Gathering because they were doing alternate like they're kind of like what we would consider variant covers in comics. They're called alt arts in Magic the Gathering. And so on really important cards or cards that they think are going to be fan favorites, they'll often do an alt style on them or multiple or alternate styles sometimes. And so for this specific set, they wanted the alt style to be more comic book looking. And when I say comic book looking, I mean black inks, heavy black spots, and more textured black work and more flat colors. Because historically, most Magic cards have a more painterly look to them, a more fantasy painting style. So a lot of the work that I've done for Magic the Gathering has been on their alt arts, but I have done a bunch of painterly cards as well. So I did these few werewolves for the art director, and I assume that they found me through Jughead the Hunger because that was a pretty big werewolf comic, horror comic, a couple years earlier. And in the style guide for the alt art, they had a bunch of my work from Jughead the Hunger. So I'm assuming that I know that Ovidio was a comic book reader. He must have read Jughead and thought of me from that. But I think what's happening with Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering is that a lot of these art directors are younger people that are super interested in comics and all different forms of art and media. So they're bringing their own tastes into the game by way of alt arts, which is a good way to bring in different styles that you might not regularly see in Magic the Gathering. And that's why they've gotten guys like Tyler Crook and Daniel Warren Johnson and some really cool, and Alexis Zerrett has done a ton of Magic cards as well. So yeah, they're just bringing in really cool people to do these alt arts and to broaden the scope of what art looks like in that game. And some people love it, and some of the old school players of the game are very attached to the style of the fantasy painting, but they all will always have those fantasy styled cards in the main set anyway. So I think they're still happy and fine with things.
I mean, I kind of feel like Crawling Chorus fits.
Yeah, I think Crawling Course looks like a classic Magic card. I painted it all in acrylic. I didn't do any hard lines on it, so everything is defined by the shape and the form of the painting and the strokes of the brush. Yeah.
It is funny that Magic's been around long enough that now there's purists. They're like,
Oh God, yeah.
not on my lawn. What are you doing here, Magic newcomers? We don't do this. Comic book artists. Ugh, gross.
One of my new things that I'm doing in my next few books that I'm writing is trying to bring some Magic the Gathering artists over to comics because there's an incredible roster of super talented artists doing Magic the Gathering cards that are doing very unique things that you don't see in comics very often. So I'm hoping to bring some of that over.
I support this. I mean, DC got Yoshitaka Amano to do some variant covers, and I was like, why does this type of thing not happen more often? Also, why is Yoshitaka Amano not just drawing everything I want him to draw because he's amazing? But that's another story for another time. I was a big Final Fantasy guy. I didn't play Magic, but I played a lot of Final Fantasy.
Same.
It's even better than Shadowrun. So this is kind of a thing I'm curious about because I did this article last year that was about in the 90s, Pizza Hut and Marvel did a X-Men promotion where they featured a bunch of, like, Joe Madureira did a placemat, and there was all these other artists involved. And when the team was getting it together, it was really easy for them to hire people because they were paying Pizza Hut agency rates, not Marvel rates.
Mm-hmm.
Was that part of the appeal? Does like I don't I'm curious as to how magic I know you don't want to go into like the finances of it, but I am genuinely curious as to how magic rates and comic rates compare because it's curious.
I'm of the mind that people should be relatively open about their rates so that new artists aren't going into things completely blind.
Yeah.
Magic the Gathering rates on cards is roughly, I would say, double what a cover would be commissioned for in comics. So yeah, you'd make about double the money that you would make on a cover. But a bigger factor is that the original art market for Magic the Gathering is really, really lucrative.
I was gonna bring that up because Crawling Chorus having like an actual painted piece, whew.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite lucrative. The Magic the Gathering original art collectors are it's a really great community. They've got like a Facebook group and the norm for Magic the Gathering is that stuff gets auctioned on the Facebook community. So it's a whole different world, very different buyer's market than in the comic book original art scene. So it's been fun to dip my toes in that a little bit because I moved to a lot of I'm working digitally a lot now, just because it's so much faster. So getting to get my hands dirty on some of these magic cards has just been really gratifying for me, and it feels really nice to get down and dirty with ink and paint again because I haven't been able to do that in a while.
I could have sworn you did an Instagram post about how you were going to be selling, and not to keep bringing up Crawling Chorus, but that you were going to be selling that. And I remember thinking, I was like, I have never once thought about the original art market for Magic the Gathering, but I feel like it has to be insane because some of those pieces are so singular that, and also, I mean, every original art piece is by nature a one of one. There's nothing else out there. I mean, you can do artist proofs for digital stuff too, but it's kind of like a, bird of a different feather. And I just kind of felt like that had to be absolutely bananas. And so it's not surprising to learn that. I did like that you actually turned some of your stuff into Magic the Gathering playmats with your art on it. That was pretty smart. It's always good to find new ways to like kind of use your art for different ways. The big question though is, do you play on your own art when you play?
I do not. I do not. I do not use my own cards. I don't play on my own playmat art. You know what it feels like?
It's like wearing your own band's T-shirt when you're at a concert.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. It's 100% you being up on stage. I used to play music. I played in touring bands and wearing your own band's merch on stage. Like, I don't know. It's just not for me. I support any artist who is proud enough of their own work to do that. I psychologically cannot bring myself to do it. But everyone that plays in my play group in Magic the Gathering, all of them are so supportive of me, and I will often be playing against my own cards, staring at my own art in the face as they kill me in Magic the Gathering. So I'm almost traumatized by my own work now. I look at it in a different way.
I would like to say that I would be modest like you and not do that, but I feel like there would be at least one time where I'd bring out my own playmat and I'd be like, you know who did that art? It was me.
No, I can't. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it.
That's amazing. All right, last question. We got to go a little bit more serious. We started talking about this. You do have an exhausting number of things going on. You have even more ideas that it makes it increasingly exhausting on top of that. How do you keep all this going without burning yourself out going forward? I mean, I guess that's probably a big thought in your mind is like, what's the balance to all this, right?
Well, like I said, I'm going to draw only one book at a time. I'm going to take a few weeks off soon, but I'm very strict about not working on the weekends now.
And you got the 9 to 5.
And I do the 9 to 5. So in terms of my actual like time at the table, it's not even close to what it used to be, but I'm more burned out than ever because I'm exhausted from having a toddler that is very, very high energy, very boisterous. And so I'm exhausted. So it feels like I'm working more than ever, but when I look at my hours spent, I'm really not. I do find the weekends just help me recharge like crazy. And then I want to make sure that every couple months I'm taking a week or two off to recharge my batteries as well. And then I think once I get down to my schedule for the next year and I pace it out and I make sure that I'm just doing one book at a time, maybe one cover or two covers a month, and then writing maybe 2 books a month. That's gonna be my happy place. I think in my perfect world, I'm drawing 4 days a week and I'm writing 1 day a week. And I think I'm trying. It was Jeff Lemire who told me that he would he would draw for 4 days and then he would write for one day and then take the weekend off and then draw for 4 days and write for one day. And he would always he'd do a big world Bible for his new books, the first writing day. And then he would write a series at a time. So he wasn't spacing things out too much and he was like in the zone for that series. So, I mean, Jeff is a big, influence of mine, and I've been very lucky to work with him a bunch, and I can crib his work ethic and his style of working without feeling too guilty, I think, because he's just one of the best there is, and one of the nicest guys around.
And he's also someone who does a lot and writes and draws. And also it's like, you talk to anyone who makes comics and eventually someone is going to say, I don't know how Jeff Lemire does it. And the reality is he plans ahead and he plans period. And like, you need both of those things to be able to do as much as he's doing and probably as much as you're doing as well.
Yeah, like I said, I plan months in advance and I plan what I'm doing on every single day. Tomorrow I am penciling and inking a page and a half.
Wow.
And hopefully getting 3 or 4 pages of script written. So I got to get cracking tomorrow, but one of the pages is a little bit of an easier page. So yeah, but I've got every single day. I know what I'm going to be doing for the next until I go on that vacation and then come back. And I got to do some character designs tomorrow too. So it's a busy day. I try and draw the bigger thing that I have in that day in a big chunk. So I'll wake up and I'll do a few smaller things, and then I'll draw for 5 or 6 hours, and then I'll do a few smaller things. So I kind of bookend my days with smaller projects because I know that when I'm in the zone of drawing a page or two, that I need to be hyper focused on that drawing, and I don't want to pull myself out of that rhythm.
Well, I wish you nothing but smooth sailing in all of your plans. But Michael, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and talk about Frankenstein, Nullhunter, the Sacred Damned, the Silver Coin, Shadowrun, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer-artist Michael Walsh. You can find him on social media and his work on the upcoming Universal Monsters Frankenstein, The Sacred Damned, and Nullhunter. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this episode. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my Eisner-nominated subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including David Wilson, Joe, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Ninja Assassin Love Story Webcomic, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Kenny Myers, Faith Aaron Hicks, Ah Yeah Comics, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Danny Ollie, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosherd, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Travis Schmeiser, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Hole, Near Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Jingo Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Submit Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon Pills, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Leona Kingus, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Creta, Stefan Hull, Philip Myra, Chris Pachala, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Yala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Jason Assey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, Dave Brawley, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out both their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.